And the 2017 Ibrahim Index of African Governance shows that only a third of countries are driving overall improvement in African governance. The index notes, however, that many countries still fail to build on prior progress. CNBC Africa's George Ndirangu spoke to Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, to get more insight on the progress of governance in Africa.
I think the continent should be very happy with what we saw as the launch of the index today. First of all, the overall news is very positive. The overall news says, governance overall has been improving. I think over the 17 years that we've had the index, we've seen an overall improvement in governance indicators. However, and this is the big caution that the index gives us this year, and the advantage of this year is that we're looking at trends. We're looking at 10-year trends and then 5-year trends. And what those trends show us is that there's some slowdowns in some areas and there's some slippages in others. So while overall there is general improvement, there clearly is a need to redouble the effort, to continue where we're doing well, and to ensure that new variables which have been added and new things that we're looking at, particularly in the areas of peace and security, which are particularly important, both for governance but also for development, because this is what this is. I think the index is really a sense of what is the health of the continent. It's one of the most comprehensive indices that we have, both looking at economic opportunity, human development, peace and security, human rights, and human participation. So it really is quite comprehensive. And so we now have, I think, for the past 5 and 10 years, I think an informed database to talk about the health of the continent overall.
Right, and we'll get into the breakdown, but let's just talk about the criteria. Now, the 2017 index, this one combines 100 indicators, 36 independent African and global data institutions. But we also see that the set data continues to be revised in accordance with best practice. We're concerned about what now informs the criteria for most of these countries and their rankings. Help us create context for this.
What we are trying to do, what the index tries to do, as you know, is be as complete as possible. And so in some areas we have not had the right indicators for some time, simply because nobody was collecting that data. So what the index has done and what the foundation has done is actually go out and look for more organizations, for example, Afrobarometer, that has come in this year, and say to them, can you please help us get more data, more accurate data? So I think what we have today is about 66% of the data, which is perception data, which is actually paid for and has been carried over for a period of 5 years. So we get the sense of sort of how good the data is. We look at the data. We also look at what's happening on other continents, like in Latin America, where some of similar data has already been collected. For example, in the areas of peace and security, Latin America has a lot more knowledge and information on how you get that, unfortunately, because they have some experience with unrest in the populations. The other thing that we've tried to do is, initially, when the index was launched, a lot of the data was coming from more or less the same sources, Bretton Woods institutions and institutions in the development space. What we have now tried to do, what the index has tried to do, is sort of broaden it out to a lot more African institutions that collect data. The Economic Commission for Africa also collects some data, which is now, I think, part of the database, so that what you get is a more balanced result of that. Of course, one of the big issues that we know on the continent is the problem of statistics. And we continue to work to strengthen that. At the ECA, we have a Center for Statistics that is working to ensure that we can get much better, much more accurate data. And I think this is a side result of the index, is that it gives us a sense of what more we are lacking, and what more we need to do. And as part of the foundation's work, they go out and sort of help us complete that data set. So.
And now we've noted the time, 5 years, we have 10 years, depending on what kind of variable it is. But one interesting case that is coincidentally at the same time is Kenya's case. 10 years. 2007, we had the same conversation where we had the elections, and there was a bit of unrest that, of course, tied into the issue on governance. And now, 2017, Supreme Court has said that the president will now continue, of course, on the backlog of what had been said with opposition. Now, how does this inform your decisions now to map out probably indices now on the Kenyan context? We know things that have been happening over 2007, over the last 10 years, can shift within the last month of you having such a launch?
I think Kenya's case is the perfect case to illustrate the index. When you look at where Kenya was 10 years ago, Kenya was working hard to improve its overall governance ranking.
Right.
When you look at 5 years later, after the constitution was passed, Kenya had the bump up, and Kenya is actually one of those countries that did well over the 10 years in some of the indices, and then did well over the 5 years in others.
Right.
And one of the indices where they did much better in the 5 years rather than the 10 years was participation. And this is, I think, a demonstration of the fact that the laws and the decentralization have given people a sense that they can actually participate in the civil debate and in the public debate on what is the trajectory of their development. When you look at this year, Kenya is not among the top 10, if I recall correctly. And so this is a 1 year, this is what is happening this year. And so it is a sense of Kenya has gone from, we had a problem, we fixed it, we put in new laws, and we're now testing the implementation. And I think this is the issue with governance. It's not a 1 day, it's not a 1 year issue. It's a trend. It's something that you work on. It's building institutions. And building institutions takes time. I think what we have seen in Kenya is now they have good laws. Now they have a sense of what it is that the Electoral Commission and the judiciary should do. But we have not tested the implementation. What we've just seen is a testing of that implementation process. And after that, there will be some correction. So we hope that when we sit here in 5 years' time and we look at how has Kenya done in participation in economic opportunity, that those numbers will go back up again, because this would have been a learning moment for Kenya and allow it to rebound in the positive direction.
Right. Speaking of a learning moment, we have new entrants. We talked about this before we began. South Sudan. Of course, we need to know the relation to stability and economic performance. We're talking about 40 African countries over the last 10 years have improved. In the last 5, we have a lot that has changed that is now influencing the new entrants. How do you work that out? Best practices shared and trying to understand a country's demographic at the same time.
I think two things. Governance is very local and it's very national, but then there are external factors, of course, that impact the overall sense of peace, security, safety, and even economic development. What we are seeing today is an improvement overall in the world growth. And so by definition, you get a rub-off on the continent. However, what we see is that, you know, even if you get the positive externalities from the external environment, you do still have to do some internal reforms to ensure that you can continue. So countries like Sudan, what you will get is they'll get an initial bump because they're coming in, you know, first time coming in, you know, they're starting from a low base, and so any sort of new actions that they do, you know, carry quite a huge impact. But what then they need to do is look at what the others are doing, and I think one of the good things that the index does, it gives you a sense of sort of the distance between you and the next best person, or how far you have improved in your index. So I think countries like Sudan can look at sort of what is happening in the neighborhood. You have countries like Kenya, you have countries like Rwanda, you have countries like Ethiopia that are doing well in some of those indices. And so that sharing exactly of best practice will be an important part to understand, you know, how if Sudan wanted to be among the top 10 in the next 5 years when we sit here, this is what they will need to do, and this is who they will need to look like.
Right. I'm particularly curious about what you think of Rwanda, because everyone has been pointing to Rwanda as the number one in terms of accountability, transparency, governance, and they've marketed it. Now it looks like the number one economic destination for East Africa, of course outperforming other larger economies. When you think of Rwanda and all these factors come to the table, given how small the country is, what comes to mind?
Again, I think that what the index measures is improvements in different indices. And I think what is unquestionable is the fact that Rwanda has done extremely well. When we look at the 10-year period, 2007 to 2016, we have 5 countries at the top that have done quite well. It's Rwanda, it's Cote d'Ivoire, it's Libya, it's Togo, and I think it's Zimbabwe. However, when you look at the 5-year trends, Rwanda has fallen out of that, which means that Rwanda is maybe celebrating its laurels and needs to refocus and strengthen its efforts. So I think what we see in Rwanda is clearly a case of good institutions pay off. We know that they pay off. We see the transparency pays off. We see that persistence pays off. And so I think that when you look at the indices on Rwanda, there is a sense that they continue to improve. There are a few, again, like I said, and this is the big theme of the overall index this year is overall progress, but some signs of watch out. We need to make sure that we're not slipping. Rwanda was the poster child for good behavior on gender balance and even, you know, women empowerment. I think this year when we look at the data, Rwanda is slipping a little bit because everybody wants to become a Rwanda. So the benefit of having Rwanda is that it creates the competition that we need for everybody to move up. So I think Rwanda needs to come back and reclaim its position that others are beginning to take hold of, and so I think this is of course there's a lot of debate about, is it easier to have a good governance environment in a smaller country than in a larger one. But when you look at the overall data as well, and you see the top 10 large economies on the continent, Nigeria is overall improving, and that is sort of how we qualify the 10-year, 5-year trends. It's, you know, we see increasing improvement in Nigeria. We see increasing improvement in Angola. We see some signs of deterioration in South Africa. We see overall improvement in Egypt. So overall, the larger countries as well are doing well. Maybe it takes a little bit longer for them to get to that endpoint, but we see that it's not a question of small or big. It's really a question of determination, leadership, institutions building, and persistence in the reforms.
That was Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa.